Hi, I'm Jonathan Baylis of So Buttons Comics, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to a special edition of the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's May 18th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. These podcasts are published to celebrate the exhibitors of this year's virtual edition of the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. TCAF is an annual event gathering comic book creators from around the world to promote broad and diverse voices towards a betterment of the medium of comics through panels, keynote exclusives, and just basically enjoying the fun of comics. On this episode, I chat with Jonathan Baylis about So Buttons at TCAF 2021. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Jonathan is the author of the autobiographical comic series So Buttons. In the tradition of Harvey Pekar's American Splendor, Jonathan matches his stories with groundbreaking artists to capture down-to-earth slices of everyday life and pulp culture. For over 10 years, he has collected his stories into a self-published So Buttons series, of which there are currently 10 issues and a couple of specials. Jonathan lives in the birthborough of his dad, Brooklyn, along with his Canadian wife and their son. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Jonathan Baylis about So Buttons at TCAF 2021. So, Jonathan Baylis, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
So it's funny. At home, I have this box that, at one point I had this idea that, when I get buried or when I get cremated, the first comic books I ever read would go with me, I think I created a list at some point of the dates on them, to see which was released first at the newsstand. But my mom would buy me Spider-Man comics
cool.
at the supermarket when I was a kid. And the funny thing is I think the very first comic I ever read was an issue where they took off the comics code because it was like drug related. I think Harry Osborn was he's like on lewds or something.
Yeah.
So my first comics were Spider-Man. That's how I learned how to read. Basically, was by Spider-Man. But I think when I did all the dates of the books, I think the actual first comic that was ever bought for me was a Superman comic where he fought Solomon Grundy, and it was drawn by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez.
Oh, wow.
Who was an amazing artist.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. That's wonderful. Good influences there for sure growing up. But I'm wondering, who influences your work today? Who are you reading today?
So my whole thing is autobio, right? So I do try to read a lot of autobio stuff. And, right now, someone that I've worked with, but someone whose work I absolutely admire is a woman named Summer Pierre. She's another New Yorker, but not New York City. She's in upstate New York. There's a woman right now who is drawing comics named Keeler. I always forget if it's Keeler or Kyler Roberts. And she does these very dry, funny stories about her being a parent and her life. Gabrielle Bell is another one who does this amazing autobio stuff. So that's like who's been inspiring me lately, because I'm reading them right in front of me, at night. But of course, who inspired me to do autobio comics at the beginning, of me doing this whole So Buttons thing, of course, is Harvey Pekar, because I followed that model, right? Because he is a writer who collaborates with many different artists. So, Harvey is definitely, a role model in that way. But I got to say, I am talking to a Canadian right now I was really crazy about Seth and Chet
Mm-hmm.
Brown, Chester
Yeah.
Brown, and
Mm-hmm.
those autobio or semi-autobio books. When I first discovered indie stuff, when I broke away from reading superheroes and found indie stuff, I was crazy about those Canadians.
Great. Lots of good influences there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So we're here talking under the context of the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, and with that in mind, wondering if you have any favorite convention or festival moments that you'd like to share.
Favorite festival moments. I mean, I, you know, I've been doing this now probably I would say like a dozen years, right? And there's all different kind of festival moments. But I mean, I think one that just stands out is my very first convention was something called MoCA, Museum of Comic and
Mm-hmm.
Cartooning Art, that's in New York City, and it was simply that I had no intention of doing this forever, right? Like I have no intention of doing it for a decade,
Mm-hmm.
but I had some strips that were in various free publications around town, and I was like, well, let me put together, the little pamphlet and sell it. And so being at MoCA, which at that year I think was the first year it was at the Armory. After the previous year was in something called the Puck Building, and I think temperatures of 110 degrees were
Oh,
reached, and people
wow.
passed out, and
Yep.
they had fire trucks came.
Oh
So the
my.
next year it was at the Armory.
Sure.
So that was my first one, and I think just selling that first book was an unbelievable moment. So that really sticks out to me, is just being like, oh, someone put a couple of bucks down for this thing that I made, and that was wonderful, and inspired me to just keep going.
Sure. That's a great feeling for sure. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So we're here talking about your newest project that you're exhibiting at TCAF called So Button. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about it and maybe the origin of the book as well.
Sure. So Buttons is my series of autobio comics. I've been putting them out for over 10 years now. The issue that's at TCAF this year is So Buttons number 11. So you would almost say like it starts the second decade of So Buttons comics. And basically the way that I sell the comic, in an elevator pitch at a convention, I go, it's mostly funny true stuff interpreted by different artists. And if you like anthologies where you get to see a lot of different styles, because I try to tailor all the stories, even though they're about me and they're in my voice, I try to tailor the stories to how it is that they interpret their art. So I've got some artists that are maybe a little bit more abstract or sketchy, and I try to do a story that might be a little bit more raw about my life. Or I could do a story about, like, oh, this is a story about my Boston Terrier, and something, I'll collaborate with somebody that works in a clean line, or a manga esque kind of art, that kind of thing. But yeah, so I there were a couple of free publications around town, and I remember the first one, I think it was called like Free Comics NYC, and they were just on newsprint. They were like 4 pages or something like that, and they were calling out for people. And I had a friend, and I was like, hey, we could probably just do a comic. And he was like, yeah, well, if you write it, then I'll draw it for you. And I go,
Hmm.
great. So we collaborated on that one story, and I got into that newspaper. And then I noticed my wife, who's Canadian, her name's Ophira Eisenberg, and she's a comedian. She was doing comedy in the Village, and there was like a little magazine. It was called The Comical, and inside it was all stories about the clubs around town and what's going on. But I think the editor was just a comic book fan, and he
Oh,
actually had Harvey Pekar strips in
wow.
there, like reprints,
Yep.
of,
Yep.
of, of old, Harvey Pekar one pagers. And I reached out to him and I said, look, I said, I'm dating a comedian. I said, I could probably, work on a strip for your magazine that is brand new, and about dating a comic. And he's like, yeah, give it a try. So the first artist that I worked with was super busy at the time. So I was like, oh, you know what? Let me go to Craigslist. Do you guys have Craigslist in Canada?
Oh, it's all over the world. Sure. Yeah.
All over, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I used Craigslist, and I was like, finding an artist, guaranteed publication, guaranteed publishing. And I found a couple of guys, David Byer and TJ Kirsch, who came from the Joe Kubert School. It was a
Oh,
cartooning
wow.
school
Yep.
in New Jersey.
Hmm.
And, and they both sent me stuff, and I love both their work. So I wound up working with TJ on on the Dating a Comedian strips, and I worked with David on some other strips, and we got into like a literary review, and in between the two of us, we had enough strips going that's what turned into this collection. I was like, oh, let's see what happens when I just put it all in one thing, right? So I put it
Hmm.
in this book, and the thing about Sew Buttons is that every story starts with the word "so," like, so here's what's going on in this story, right?
Hmm.
So it's Sew Buttons, which is something that my mother said when I was a kid. She'd be like, I want you to clean your room, and I'd be like, so, and she'd be like, sew buttons on your underwear, like that. Like that was
Right.
just something that she would say.
Sure.
So I originally had just wanted to call a comic "So," but I figured my first review would be "So what."
Right. There you go. Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? I'll just call it "So Buttons," and that's the answer. So I did that. I did that first issue, and I decided, like, oh, you know what? I think I have a couple more stories. I'll do two books, and I'll be done. Like that. Like that'll be it. Like I can't imagine I'll do many more. But by going to these conventions and meeting all of these just amazing young creators, I was like, oh, well, I want to work with this person, and I
Hmm.
want to work with that person. I want to work with that person. And one advantage I had was I had a very solid day job at the time. Like I was, working as like a producer editor at HBO, like just doing
Oh,
commercials for
wow.
for HBO.
That's
And I
cool.
was like, you know what? I can pay everybody. I was like, which is not something that you could always find in small press, super indie mini comics. Like I offered some people, I think, maybe their first paid job ever, and that's always been my way, is that everyone that I work with, it's like I absolutely want them to feel like they are completely respected as an artist, and I pay them. That's the
Hmm.
job. It's a
Hmm.
job, and I'm paying them. So and I would just find people, and I said, oh, I would like to write something for this style, and I want to write something for that style. And like another issue came out, and another issue came out, and another issue came out, and then I started to do these things where there's an artist named Tom Scioli who does like a fantastic Jack Kirby style. He was doing this thing for Image Comics called Godland at the time,
Okay.
and we were talking about first comics earlier, and I remember my very first Jack Kirby comic. It was the
Uh,
Captain America
yeah.
212. It's like the Red Skull's throwing a
Wow.
boulder at Cap, and I
Yeah.
was like, I bet you Scioli could do a really fun riff
Mm.
on on that image, and he did. So then I started doing like a few different tribute covers. Like I was friendly with this guy Jay Lynch, who was like a true like underground uh, comics genius. Friends with Spiegelman and Crumb and all those guys, and he used to do designs for Garbage Pail Kids.
Oh,
So I was like,
yeah.
and I worked at the Tops Company. Actually,
Uh,
I think this issue number 11
yeah.
that's out now at TCAF is what I call my last internship story, because
Right.
I interned at Marvel, I interned at Valiant, and I interned at Tops. And I met Jay there, and I had him draw basically a Garbage Pail Kids cover for Sew Buttons. So
Hmm.
I would go back and forth between doing like a homage to something else or to something original. Like in issue number 9, I had this artist, Alyssa Sala, who I think works at Oni Press. Anyway, Alyssa Sala, she's amazing, great artist, and she just did a cover based on me eating a sandwich at the Second Avenue Deli. Like,
Yeah.
so it's just like I just find different creators to do different kinds of things, and this particular issue, when another one of those like first books, like when I used to go to my very first comic book dealer. It was at a flea market. And, my parents would be like, here, you could have this dollar bag. And you'd get a dollar bag. And inside would be like 10 comics that nobody wanted, or like
Okay.
10 comics that were like beat up or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But I loved those grab bags. And in one of them was something called Plop. And
Okay,
Plop
yeah,
was,
yeah.
DC's sort
Mm-hmm.
of riff on maybe Mad Magazine a little bit.
Yep.
Just very cartoony, funny stuff. And most of the covers were drawn by Basil Wolverton, who, was a mad guy. And, he did all these kind of like, super like ugly, distorted faces,
Yeah.
on the covers and figures. And so I was like, oh, I know somebody who does a really great, tight, uh, tight, detailed style that, I bet you he could do a fantastic Basil Wolverton. And I wrote Jim Rugg. And Jim Rugg is a guy that I've
Yeah.
seen a million times at conventions. And like,
Mm-hmm.
he's a Pittsburgh guy, like Tom Scioli was a Pittsburgh guy. And Ed Piskor had drawn something for me, and he's a Pittsburgh guy. So I was like, oh, I just collected the three Pittsburgh guys, the Musketeers. And I
Yeah.
got Jim Rugg to do this cover, and he just hit it out of the park. I mean,
Wow.
he does these takes on artists that are unbelievable. Like, I think he did a couple of covers for Ed Piskor's new book for Fantagraphics called Red Room. He did one, I think, in a Dan Clowes style, and he did one that was like a tribute to Love and Rockets #1. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the guy
Mm-hmm.
is just a chameleon genius. And for me, for So Buttons 11, he did this great Basil Wolverton tribute to like Plop #6, and that guy's amazing.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Really fun.
So it's interesting though. I mean, yes, and you're benefited by a variety of different artists, but doesn't that create a challenge for you? Because I know that if some people get into a flow and a workflow with someone they know when it comes to doing art, the writer and the artist work closely together. But the fact that you've got like a variety of different artists, like each one has their own, work ethic and management, I guess.
Totally.
So how do you deal with that with all these different artists?
So I'll tell you. I mean, everything is really worked out organically. As far as like the people that I work with on a regular basis, like from the very beginning, TJ Kirsch, did those very first strips, about dating a comic, and now it's sort of like, and then marrying my wife, and then having a kid. TJ Kirsch has played a part in every single issue of So Buttons, and I know that I could, send him anything from, it could be a 1-pager, it could be a 4-pager, and I know that he'll do it, and he'll be great, and he knows the sensibility of of my writing and the comic, and he's amazing. This particular issue was a challenge, right? And because of COVID, like the last story that I finished writing, I think, was the So Scotchy Scotch story, and I think
Yeah.
I finished writing it literally in March, after lockdown started
Right.
in New York.
Hmm.
And I just knew that this year was going to be a weird year. And the way that it goes is I typically will write maybe 1.5 times the amount of work that I need to go into an issue, and whatever comes in first by usually my goal is to have a new issue at a convention called SPX, um,
Hmm.
down in Bethesda, Maryland. That's sort of like my goal every year. It's like, oh, I'll have a book for SPX this year. I'll have a book for SPX this year. And it just depends on what comes in. And sometimes the issues have been 16 pages, and sometimes the books have been 32 pages. So
Oh,
every issue kind of shifts in length, but I've never not had an issue in a year. And as far as just working with new people, I've been really lucky in that, the people who let's say couldn't do it. Like, there was a year where I think I asked every artist from this collective called Pizza Island, and they were like all these amazing creators. It was like Kate Beaton, who's Canadian,
oh yeah,
uh,
yeah.
Julia Wirtz, Lisa Hannawalt, and I think I basically asked them to work with me. Like it was, I want to say like it was like a month too late or something like that, because they were all doing amazing work and got book deals, and like
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
no
yeah.
way, like they were too busy, and I probably couldn't afford them anyway.
Mm.
But it's only once has it happened where someone actually said yes, and then 6 months down the line they just go no, like that,
Yeah.
like that is not something that's really happened, because basically most of the people that I work with, like, again, are like, they're small press people that, they're almost certainly doing this out of their love and passion for comics and the craft. And I'm not writing them 24-page stories. I'm
Right,
writing
right. Yeah.
usually between 1 and 4 pages. I mean,
Hmm.
a couple of times I've written longer stories, and luckily that's worked out. Like, I think I wrote a story about my dog, like the just sort of like how I got a dog, but then I lost the dog almost immediately, but then got another dog, and it was drawn by a woman named Rachel Dukes, and it was 12 pages, and and she did it, and it took longer than usual, but it worked out, and
Hmm.
it was great. And I also have this commitment to working with new people. Like, do you know a cartoonist whose name is Mari Naomi? Do you know who that
I'm
is?
afraid and doesn't ring a
That's
bell.
that's okay. She does a lot of autobio stuff too. She's a creator out of California, but
Hmm.
she also has like an extra claim to fame in that she's created these really cool databases of cartoonists. Like, one is like is a database of cartoonists of color, and
Hmm.
another database that's cartoonists of LGBTQ
Hmm.
people. And so, I think, when I started, just because it's the way that it happened, I probably, did a lot of work with like a lot of guys, white guys my age, kind of a thing,
Right,
and I
right,
was like,
right.
oh, I want different, like, I want different voices through their art to collaborate with me, and it would create, this greater whole. And so every issue, I'm always working with somebody absolutely brand new, because I'm searching out people on these databases that she created. In this issue, I did a story about volunteering for Make a Wish and
Hmm.
bringing one of my kids to meet John Cleese.
Right.
And I was like, all right, I want a British artist, and I'm gonna look for a British artist in the LGBTQ database, and I found someone amazing, and they did a great job. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so so I have, like, if you go through um, all of the issues, you will find people that tell similar stories about certain periods of my life and certain kinds of tales. But then you'll also find people that are unique to the stories that I write for them. And I don't know, I feel like it's a great hodgepodge of talent that I've been really blessed to work with for a decade. And some people, they move on to do like some amazing things. I mean, one guy that I've worked with 3 or 4 times is a guy named Noah Van Sciver,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's huge right now, and
Sure.
also just one of the most prolific artists you know there is in indie comics these days.
Right,
He's
right.
just voluminous in his work. Like, he did his 10,000 hours a long time ago. But I had mentioned Summer Pierre earlier, but she just announced that she just got a deal with Fantagraphics to
Oh, there
publish
you go.
one of her books. So
Yeah.
I'm so happy and proud of all these people that I've worked with, that then they wind up being amazing, and I will also pat myself on the back for having a good eye.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. You got
It's
some
yeah.
amazing folks there. That's wonderful. So the other thing that happens at conventions and festivals is you get a lot of people coming up and asking, for advice. How would I make my own comic book? So I'm wondering, what would you say to someone if they came up to you and said, I want to make a comic book. What do I do?
Well, I mean, for me, right? So, I guess what's different about me than a lot of the small press creators today, I mean, a lot of these small press creators are self sufficient.
Mm,
They they are both the writer and the artist, and they just do it and go for it. But for someone like me, if someone was like, oh, I want to do what you do with the sort of the Harvey Pekar model, for me, my advice would be very simple. It would be go to conventions, talk to the people whose work you think is amazing, ask them to do a collaboration that is short, like 1 to 4 pages. I mean, there are a lot of people who they're like, oh, I have an idea for a graphic novel and I want to get someone to draw 120 pages for free, like they'll get a back end deal when I sell the movie,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. And,
Yeah.
I say, start small, meet someone you love, 1 to 4 pages, and absolutely pay them. And
Right.
I think
Mm-hmm.
paying people money goes a long way to create respect and trust in a collaboration. And that's what I do. Almost everything I do is collaboration. Because like when in my daily life, I'm a writer, producer, editor person, and I'm constantly working with audio engineers and editors and designers, and all trying to work together to create something that is greater than the sum of the parts. And that is what comics is. Comics is a glorious alchemy of collaboration.
That's terrific. Good stuff. Good advice. So we've talked about this issue of Sew Buttons. Wondering if you tell me what's next for you. Do you have any other major projects coming up down the road that you can talk about?
So with Sew Buttons, I mean, it really is an every year kind of a deal. I mean, what's special about this particular issue of Sew Buttons is I've self-published all of the other issues. 1 through 10 is self-published. This particular issue, number 11, is being published by a Colorado press called Tinto Press, and it's a guy named Ted Intorcio, and he's published a lot of great people. Noah Van Sciver, Josh Bayer, Lauren Barnett. I mean, just really great. I think MS Harkness. A lot of great people. And so he's, this is the first time I'm being published by somebody else. So that is pretty exciting. And every year's another issue. So who knows? If next year we'll have the same relationship and do another one. But if I were to say like, oh, I have a 5-year plan, I do have a longer graphic novel that involves New York and the Catskills
Oh,
and the
wow.
Borscht Belt. My
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother used to own a bungalow colony in the Borscht Belt, and my
Oh,
mother, was sort of like a waitress
yeah.
for a place where tons of comedians and
Sure.
entertainers came in,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's certainly big of influence in my life. I mean, I married a comedian, so
Yeah, yeah.
uh, I do have that graphic novel sort of like on the horizon. But hopefully next year, like every year forever, another issue of So Buttons.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So, in addition to talking to people and networking at festivals, conventions, also about buying books. So, I'm wondering where you recommend people go to buy your books.
To buy my books, you can go to sobuttons.com. That's sobuttons.com, and you'll be able to see all of the previous issues as well as the current issue to buy. At TCAF itself, they have a marketplace that you can go to, and I've uploaded a digital version for people to buy, but you could also put in an order for a physical version. And I believe that TCAF is collecting all those orders, and I'll send the books out to the TCAF people, and they send it out to people when it's all over. But those are a couple of good places. And then digitally, purely digitally, I think Amazon has this service called Comixology,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been very supportive since the beginning, and they've been putting all of my issues out there. So if you want, to read the book on your iPad, you could also go to Comixology and download some So Buttons comics.
Great, great. Now, you mentioned SewButtonsComics.com, but I'm wondering if there's any other places online or through social media where people can find out more about your current and future work.
Absolutely. So you know what? It's funny because I am not the best person with social media. I'm always like, am I on social media as me? or am I a social media as something else? I am literally going to open up my phone right now. I believe on Twitter, if you want to tweet at me, I'm at Jonathan Baylis. That's JonathanBaylis. And then I believe my Instagram is it's like my original AOL address from the 90s or something, and it's Alchemy JMB. So it's the word alchemy, ALCHEM as in Mary Y, Alchemy JMB, like Jonathan Michael Baylis. And that is my Instagram. So you could find me on Instagram at Alchemy JMB. You can find me at Twitter at Jonathan Baylis. And on Facebook, there's even something called So Buttons Comics. It's comics with an X. You can go to So Buttons Comics and you'll find my fan page for the books on Facebook. And there you have it.
Very good. Well, Jonathan, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
Let's take a look. I'll take a quick look at so this particular issue of So Buttons just in some weird way became a kind of sort of UK focused issue. It's really weird and funny how these things turn out sometimes. Like the very first story is called So Scotchy Scotch, and it's about how I of course like Scotch and how I visited Edinburgh because my wife was performing at the Edinburgh Fringe, and I got my first taste of Scotch, and how I continued to want to find very specific Scotches in my life, and then I wound up doing a story about John Cleese, how I volunteer for Make-A-Wish, and and I bring this kid to meet John Cleese, and I found a British artist, and then I had lived in London at some point in the 90s, for summer abroad, not study abroad, and I discovered the British indie press, and I actually got to work with like this godfather of small press comics in the UK, a guy named Phil Elliott, and he's done work with Eddie Campbell and Shaky Kane and like all these great people from the British scene, and I got him to draw a story about me finding his comics in England, and weirdly enough I found them at a comic book store owned by a guy from Brooklyn.
No.
So, that was kind of a funny thing. And then, I basically ended up with, I've been doing a series of strips over the past few issues about my many internships in the comic industry. I had, an internship at Marvel, an internship at Valiant, and this story is about my internship at the Topps company, and how I got that internship, and how it influenced me, and how I met other people, and I talked earlier about how I got Jay Lynch to do this Garbage Pail Kids cover for me. I have a story about Jay. It's basically just a joke strip about what Jay said about the origin of Joe Bazooka, and it's drawn by Rick Parker, who is this amazing funny artist. Like he draws funny comics. He drew Beavis and Butthead for Marvel Comics back in the day, and is also one of the most prolific letterers for Marvel Comics of all time. And he's a friend of mine, and he did a strip there. So I mean, it is just a it is a really great collection that I'm proud of, and the talent that's in there is talent that anyone would be lucky to work with. And I really hope that a couple of people, hear your podcast and go pick up this issue because it's great.
Thanks to Jonathan for the chat. You can discover more about Jonathan on Twitter at Jonathan Baylis, that's JonathanBaylis, and on Instagram at AlchemyJMB, and online at SoButtons.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.